Welcome to Just Blazor Programming. This is the first in a series of Blazor programming tutorials that will teach you the basics of Blazor. So who is this video for? If you're someone from the .NET space and want to understand Blazor, or if you're somebody who has an interview to go to and needs to refresh Blazor concepts quickly, this is the perfect series for you. Now, I will teach you in this way. I will go for the high level concept first of whatever the topic is, and then I'll teach you the programming behind that concept. So how to actually run that in Blazor. And if you have not started yet, I would need you to have a Blazor project ready to go. If you do not have one, I have a video right here that will teach you how to get started on one, just the very basic one that Microsoft provides. So you don't gotta do too much work in there, but you will need some packages and that could get confusing, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, go watch that, then return here, and then we'll get you started. So let's go over data binding. Data binding in Blazor works like in any other component-based framework, Angular, React, whatever, in which that the UI is connected to the data behind it. So and it comes in two different flavors: one-way data binding and two-way data binding. And the difference between them is that one-way data binding renders whatever the data that's connected to it, while two-way data binding both renders and manipulates the data. So that's all there is to it. One-way data binding, two-way data binding is the easiest concept you can learn on Blazor, and I'm going to be moving on to the programming example. So stick around for a second while I change. Okay, everybody, now we're going to begin the program portion of this tutorial, and this is the original project that I made in that video in case you went there. It is called Intro Project, and I made it with Microsoft Visual Studio 2019. This is 2022 though. However, the steps are the exact same to create it, and you could use either one regardless. So in this case, I'm just going to go over what you'll be getting to make sure that it runs. So just give it a moment here. So as you can see, this project has already 3 components built into it. We have a home tab, a counter tab. If you click, you get to see some numbers, and the fetch data tab, which is they've hard coded some data in there somewhere, and now this will show it. So if you just want an example of one-way data binding, this weather forecasting is a great example of it, as all it could do is display the data that's connected to it. And this counter is an example of two-way data binding, where this is actually going to change it's going to change and render whatever it is that's up here. So that's basically it. Tutorial over. I'm kidding. We're actually going to go into it a little bit more in depth and teach you how to actually do the data binding within Blazor. So let's get started. In this case, I want you to have the index.razor file out and about, like you see I have it here. And then I want you to go to the Intro project. Don't click like that, but you need to right click it, add new folder, and we're going to call it models. Here we're going to house all our classes basically. So this is very similar to how Razor ASP.NET MVC does it, and that's how I'm used to it. And I'm going to organize my code similarly. You don't have to do this, but if you want to follow the tutorial, please do. Now we're going to add a new item in here. We're going to add a new class and call this class base model. So in base model, it might give you, you could do one of these. Boom, boom. So Blazor has already preemptively added the ID and the name to this class. I think this is something that it will do automatically to any class. But this is what I want. I just want a simple basic model that has 2 properties in it, one integer and one string for my example. So we're going to keep that there for now. In the index.razor, we don't need any of this, so you get rid of it all. And now I want to bring this property into this Razor file. So how do we do that? Just like you see up here where it says add page, we're going to add the model the way you would add it in a class. Would be the using whatever the namespace name is, blah blah blah. So that's what we're going to do here, using, and then we're going to name the folder the models, the directory, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, let's add some HTML portions. I want to add an H2. I know I just deleted one, but who cares, right? Who cares? It's flow. This is a very easy project. And then we want a breakpoint. We want a break element, and we want an input HTML element there. So now this is the important bit of Blazor. In order to add actual C# logic into one of these files, you need to add a code block here. This is where all your C# logic is going to be basically compiled and used in this HTML stuff, in the HTML itself. So I want to make a string. So just like if you know C#, it's just one of these. I don't care what you call it. It doesn't matter. This is going to be a variable that exists locally to this code block, and now we're going to create an object based off the model. So let's do that. So base model. So this should have access to base model. Yep. Base model example equals new base model. And now let's fill these properties in. What was it as ID? Yeah. So ID is equal to 1, let's say, and then its name will be equal to Sally. And I'm going to capitalize Bob for neatness, and I'm going to remove this. So I want to point out something. I know that I wrote this incorrectly, but before I continue, the IntelliSense of Blazor is very problematic sometimes. So even if you're writing the code correctly, and you know you're writing correctly, it might complain. So in this case, I'm wrong when writing this. But when it comes to writing correct code like this should be correct. This is denoting it as something that's wrong. So what's it saying? It says public index. So don't worry about that. As you can see, it went away. And sometimes that will happen. So if you see that happen and you know you're correct and it's not going away like it did here, what you need to do is just close the Visual Studio out and then open it again. It will sometimes happen. That's unfortunate when it comes to the IntelliSense, but it is what it is. Anyways, let's continue. So for one-way data binding, we can do something like this. At name. Boom. This is how you refer to the to anything that's inside the code block. If they're variables. And you know what? I'm going to have another one. This time referring to the property. So I want the object, my bad. The example, and I want its ID. And then I want its name as well. Again, very simple project. In fact, I'm going to move that into the middle. Boom. Don't worry about this for now. We're just going to show you what one-way data binding is going to look like. So all these header elements are connected to the variable and the object properties. So this is just to show you that you could do either or when it comes to this. So let's see what we got. Boom. Bob wants Sally. Perfect. Beautiful. Beautiful. That's what all my years of doing programming has gotten me. Bang. So I'm gonna do this just, data binding. And now we're gonna add another one down here for two-way data binding. And add a space between. Maybe add 2 spaces just to make sure. Boom. So now we want to make a change to, now we want to do something with these properties or whatever. So in this case, we will work with this input now. So in order for you to actually make a change in Blazor, you have to bind whatever the property is to some input in this case. So we're going to work with both the string. We're going to work with just this over here. Forget Bob for now. In fact, forget Bob completely. We're not going to need him for this particular example. So in this case, we're going to make this a type text. Yes, we're going to be working with the text example here. So in order for you to bind a value to an input, you have to ampersand bind, and you see that it's going to give you all these hints. What we want is the value here. You put an equals. You put your double quotes here, and then you can add the property. So in this case, it's going to be example dot. I said dot. So again, this is an issue with the IntelliSense itself again, but yeah, this is how you do it. So I don't care about that. We're gonna put that there. So you see, it's not complaining because it's not supposed to complain. This is supposed to be correct. So let's run it and see what happens. As you can see, I'm doing it correctly because Sally is actually showing up in the input as I expected it to be. But right now it's not going to do anything. It's not going to change anything. So nothing's you're not going to see anything rendered right now. But that is an example of the IntelliSense not being correct while you are being correct. So now let's actually bind these properties together so that when you do change the input, you change what's happening here. So in this case, bind these two properties together so that when you change the input, you change the Sally as well. So the way you do that is by adding at bind dash value. Then you put the colon, and then you'll get some, it's going to recommend you some things. What you want is the event, though. You want an event. Event equals on input. So there are two that you could use in Blazor, on input and on change. So in this case, we're just going to do it on input. So when you type it, it actually will show up. So let's show you what that looks like. As you can see, this is the variable that's tied to it. So this is one-way data binding here. This is two-way data binding because I'm actually changing it to whatever I want. And that is the end of this example of one-way and two-way data binding. So there's not much more you need. In fact, I just did the reason why I did all this is just to show you that you can do properties. You can do this with normal variables like this. It doesn't matter as long as you're writing it correctly, as long as you have one of these. And to also show you that IntelliSense is sometimes wrong even though you're correct. So I'm just going to go over this one last time. This time with the other one. Oopsie daisy. Type is equal to. We're going to put number. So in this case, we're going to do an at bind value is equal to at example dot ID. So when the IntelliSense is being like this, try to get the name right. That's correct. And then you do the same thing. It's going to be at bind value event equals on input as well. So in this case, we're going to be changing the ID from 1 to whatever we want. So you should also see this there as well. So here is Sally test, and here is the other one. Boom. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now this works with anything. You could have a button connected to it. You can have, this input here. It really doesn't make a difference. Like this. This is working off a button, and then it adds to a variable, and then it renders it out here. And this is one-way data binding. I went over this already. So that is really it. There's nothing much more to this one-way data binding other than remember that there is an on change and on input when it comes to this. You don't really have to worry about the other stuff. Like when you go here, and then it gives you these examples. The format or culture, that's just a way that you're gonna change how it's gonna look like. What you really care about is the event when it comes to this. So That is one way data binding. That is two-way data binding. I told you it was very simple, very easy. So I know this was a bit underwhelming, but the next one we're going to get into will hopefully be a lot better, a lot more fun. I'm telling you, Blazor is very simple. So wherever you came from JS, you came from .NET, doesn't matter. You should be able to learn this quite quickly and employ it to whatever project you're working on. So I think that's the end of it. Anyways, see you next time. Like and subscribe. I promise as we go forward, I will do more and more complex things, and eventually we'll have a nice tutorial that employs everything we just learned into one useful product. Stay tuned. Welcome everybody to Just Blazor Programming. Today we're going to be discussing event handlers. That's what events was in the thumbnail. It's event handlers, but I couldn't fit it all in. Anyways, before we get started on event handlers, I want to discuss one little thing about how this tutorial is supposed to work. You do not need to go into the last video to understand this tutorial. However, we will be borrowing some concepts from there. In case you need a refresher, go to that video right here. And if not, then we can continue on. So let's do that. Event handling. Event handling is something that every single front-end framework needs. You need a way in order to interpret user interactions with your user interface, whatever it is. Angular, React, Blazor, they all do the same thing, and they have their different implementations of doing it. So in this case, how does Blazor work? Well, the key component when it comes to event handlers is this specific expression. This expression is on DOM event equals to the delegate. Now this will make more sense as we go on, but this is basically what you need to know in order to invoke an event handler in Blazor. This will be invoked inside of the HTML, whatever it is that you're gonna attribute it to. And that's where our project is gonna be focused on. I will show you how this is all supposed to work in different ways so that you have a better understanding on how event handlers work, and you will see that there are actually many ways. There are not many ways, but there are a few different ways of implementing these handlers, and it's very flexible, and it's also pretty simple as well. So don't worry. All you need to do is get your Blazor project. If you don't have an intro project ready to go, here's another video for you. Bang. And if not, then just start it up, because you do not need any other video to come to this one. So, hey everybody, I forgot to explain one last thing, and that is that Blazor supports a number of events. And on this table that you're going to see right now, these are the events that I think are most popular when you are creating a web application. So, as you can see on the table, I'm just going to go over it really quickly. These are the keywords that Blazor has in order to facilitate the event handling. So we'll just go over really quickly. Focus, you have on focus there. You have your input, on change, on input. We had that in the last video, but don't worry, you're gonna see it again this one. Keyboard, these are just the keyboard presses: on key down, key up, and key press. And mouse, in case you want to detect the mouse for whatever reason, maybe making a Blazor game or something, which you can do. Now, these are just a small scope of what Blazor actually can give you. There's a big table that Microsoft supports. I'll have that in the description below if you just want a reminder, if you need more for whatever it is that your project's going to be in the future. Either way, we're not going to need all of these. In fact, I'm just going to go over a few of them in the project itself, because once you understand how one of them works, you'll understand how all of them work, and it's really not that difficult. So now let's actually get into the project, boys. All right, boys, if this looks familiar to you, this is from the last project, but we won't be needing anything from there. As I said before, everything in this tutorial is going to be modular. So you could just come in here if you just want to look at a specific topic, or you can just go from the beginning to end. I know a lot of you like doing that, but I want to give you the flexibility of doing, whatever. So in this case, we don't care about the index. We're not going to do anything with that. We don't care about this base model here. And what we do care about is this thing here. Most of the work is going to be done right here in fetch data. So fetch data, this is from the intro project. So in case you don't know, we're going to run it. I'll run it real quick. The fetch data is basically just a table. So this comes with your intro project, and it just has a bunch of, ready to use data. So we don't have to go through it. And this is a tutorial basically on events, so we don't have to go into anything in depth. There's not gonna be any databases, nothing crazy in this one. This is just give you examples of how to work with Blazor for event handlers. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna make this table a little bit better. We're gonna add some extra stuff to it so that we can work with it, and it will give us more information. It will allow us to change it, and that's how event handlers work. You know, you have an input and then it does something. That's all an event handler is. So in this case, what I want you to do is up here above the table, we're gonna have an H3. So just write in this header date is and something else. Leave that for now. We're not gonna come back to it. We'll come back to it in a bit. And down here, we'll make a string property. Date hovering equals that. So take that string property and put it up here with the H3 right here, the H3 we just did. So whoop. Now leave that alone for now. We're not going to need it. That's just to set up for later. Obviously I'm going to show you some hovering logic, but one step at a time. In your code block, I want you to, we're going to write the delegate side of this. So if you don't remember what I just said in the video, the way you're going to write these events are going to be on DOM event on DOM equals the delegate. And all the delegate is just the function you're calling to, and the on whatever event is the, you know, on mouse click, on this, on that, on input. That's all that is. That's all you gotta know. And you're gonna put these inside these HTML blocks. So just in case. And here, what we're gonna do is that we're gonna make the date show up here whenever we hover over it. And we're gonna increase the temperature by having two buttons, one to increase the temperature, one to decrease the temperature. So this will show you how we can actually do events and pass in variables into those events so that we could change them as we will. The only other thing we will do is have an input that uses the binding of an event, aka the on change or on input binding. This is another event, but it's done a little differently. It's from the data binding side, but it is an event call. It's just done differently. But we will see now. So in this case, I want you to go to the summary. We'll start from the summary then. So we're gonna go here in the summary with outside of the. So yeah, we're gonna have to do a little bit of changes here. This will not look very nice. So we're gonna do some divs inside of it. So just do something like I'm doing now. Put the TDs, you know, vertically here. And we're gonna make a div class here, then one within that, then we're gonna make another one. So we're just gonna separate two different pieces of HTML together because we're gonna have the summary in the top part, and then we're gonna have the input to change the summary right at the bottom within the column. So in order to do that, you need an input element here. And now we need a type. The type's gonna be of text. Oopsie daisy. The type's gonna be of text. And then we're gonna put the at bind value, this is from before, from the other video, is equal to, and we're gonna copy the at forecast here, put it there. So that will bind the value to it. And now we're gonna actually add the event. This is the first version of an event call. And this is a very specific one. So in this case, we're binding this value to a change event. In this case, is gonna be on input. So what we wanna do here is that when we change the text, we're gonna change what we see up here. Now this will happen individually for each column, which I thought was pretty cool, because normally if you're working with C#, you would have to get like a third party kind of thing or build a bunch of JS code up, but in this case, you don't have to do much. You just have to do this, and you're pretty much good to go, and you can already manipulate different pieces of the column without going through all the IDs and stuff. In case you don't understand what that is, don't worry. This is just something for you .NET people out there who have worked with this and felt the frustration. Now, in that case, now that we have the input there, we're going to try it out. I don't believe we need anything else for this. In order to view this example, we'll just do this, each one of these parts, and show it. So you go to fetch data, you see, so we have our input down here, and we have the actual variable, the property. So we're going to change this a little bit. You can see on input, we test it out. Oops, test input and whatever. So this is basically data binding, pure data binding. There's nothing really crazy about it, but you know that it works with an event. So now we will work with, true events, I guess. In this case, we're going to be adding another column that we're going to put our buttons in. So in order for these tables to work, you have to match the amount of columns with the amount of columns that are going to appear down here. So the header column and the non-header columns, we're going to call this increase, decrease, temp. So now we're going to be doing another column that's going to be called increase, decrease. Sorry if I'm going over this again. I just had a gnarly mistake on my end, so I had to restart it again. But in this case, we're going to be doing another column. So we're just going to add it here and call it E. In this column, we're going to be adding our buttons. So our buttons are going to be just button. And we're going to add another button in this as well. You don't have to have them like this. And I'm going to separate them with a break HTML element here. And within this button, we're going to be called... Oh, actually, no. Here, if I did this. If I had them in a line, it'd be a lot easier. This is going to be our increase button. This is going to be our button. And this button is going to have a class as well. Class of increase. And here we're going to add the actual event handler. So our event handler is going to be the onClick. These are buttons after all. So they're supposed to be clicked on. So in this case, we don't have our function ready to go. It's not here, but it's okay. You could write it preemptively or not. It doesn't matter. However, let's go write this here, and we're going to write this down here. Class equals decrease on click. So I'm going to show you how to write the event handler. You need to first write the actual event. So in this case, we're going to write an E. Doesn't matter what letter it is, but that's what that's going to represent. Equal sign, more than sign. And then here's where you write the actual delegate. The delegate, aka, is the function. So we're going to call our function increase temperature. Now, don't worry. I know this doesn't exist yet. We're going to get to it now. And when we do that, we're going to pass in the forecast element, which is this object up here. We're looping through a list of these forecast objects, so we're going to add them in. We're going to pass that one in along with a boolean called true. That means that we want to increase the temperature. I'm going to copy that, put that here, and in this second case, we're going to put it to false. So what I'm going to show you is that you can pass in... Oh, my bad. I forgot about this part here. You put an ampersand. Oh, you have to put the @ on both of them on the side here. So what I'm gonna do is add these here, front, and then to the end. You gotta add the double quotes here as well. That's now the only issue we have is actually having our increased temperature function get created. So we're just going to create it down here. We're going to create a private void increase temperature, and now we want the weather forecast object. I don't know if you can see this, but we have access to in the data inside the data file, inside the data folder, a weather forecast class. That's what we're going to call it. So we're just going to call it the forecast object, and we're going to call boolean increase. So now we have parameters that are being passed by the HTML up here, and this is going to be very simple. We're just going to have an if and an else. So you can write the shorthand of this if you want. I just like writing the curly brackets out. That's just my style. Increase. So the reason why we wanted to pass this in is because we needed access to a certain property. In this case, the property of temperature C. So don't worry about temperature F. Temperature F is a read-only property within this class that is affected by temperature C. So anytime you make a change to the C, F will change as well. So you don't have to change F. In fact, you can't change it because it's private. It's read-only. So in this case, we're just gonna do plus equals 1. So when we increase the temperature, we increase it by 1 degree Celsius. And then if we're not doing it, aka we're decreasing it, we're gonna do minus equals 1. So we're gonna decrease it by 1 degree Celsius. Well, that should be it. We have our on click ready to go. We have our DOM element and the delegate here, and we're gonna see how this all works. So what we should be seeing is that there's gonna be another column in there with buttons, and then the buttons will actually change the temperature C value of that row. Data. You can see our buttons here, and this is temperature 12. So let's see if my coding skills are as good as I think they are. Ooh, there we go. So now it went from 12 to 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah, you get the picture. So yeah, just to make sure this still works. Perfect. So yeah, so as I said before, if you increase it and you decrease it, going down to 8, this will also increase or decrease accordingly because it is a read-only value based on this value here. So that's why that's doing that. So you basically have the gist of what an event is, an event handler does, how to invoke it. This is the most common way. But we're gonna do something else now. We're gonna actually add the mouse over event. And the reason why I want to do that is because the mouse over event is not something that web applications use a lot, except maybe if you're doing like a hover tip or something. But in case you want to do something special, like make a game that uses your mouse to follow stuff, then you can use this particular event to help you. And that's going to be a very useful thing for you to know. And then you saw that there was on that table like a bunch of other stuff. We're not going to go through it. In fact, the mouse event is probably going to be the last thing that I'm going to add into this project, and then we're done, because we're going to do it in a slightly different way. I'm going to write it slightly differently. So in order for this mouse event, I'm actually going to write the function first in this case. So we're going to do another private void. I call this date mouse hover. So what we want to do is hover over the date, and then as we hover over the date, we're going to show it up here in this string variable, which is why I told you to write that in the beginning. Now it's all going to come together. And this is the other way of writing an event. And the reason why you would want this is because there are some things in the event that you might want. So every single, like in that table, every single one has like a class associated with them. This is the mouse event args class. We're going to call this M, and then we're going to call it string date. So we're just passing in the date, and we're going to get the actual value from the mouse event itself. And the reason why we want that is because we want to know the position of the mouse. And that is one of the properties within this event, that is in this class, that the event can bring you. So we're going to add the date, and then we're going to add something like this. Just follow what I'm doing. We're gonna slash. We're gonna call it mouse coordinates space plus. We grab the m dot client, m dot client x plus another string with a space in it so we can see it better. And then we have, there's going to be a client y. So what this will do is it will pass in the date that you're hovering over and then give you the mouse coordinates. But that's not all you could do. You could actually add another, you could add more than one event handler within a single HTML property. So in this case, we want to change it when we leave the HTML. So we're making another void called date mouse leave, and all it's going to do is that when it detects that we've left the actual whatever we're detecting, we're going to reset it back to empty. So in case you don't know what I'm doing, we're going to hover over the table. We're going to change this to something, to whatever the date's going to be and whatever the actual coordinates are. And then once we leave, it will reset it to empty. In order to do that, we need to actually add it in here. So within this TD, you're going to add two event values at mouse over to be the actual mouse over equal to, and you add your double quotes at m is equal to date mouse hover. That is our void. That is our, that's our function here. That's our delegate. And this mouse hover is gonna bring in that m that we have here, and then the actual property of the forecast object for at forecast dot. There's an easy way to get it. Yeah, we're just gonna add this in there. At forecast dot date dot toString blah blah blah. We're just gonna add that in. So now you have that in there. Now we're gonna add another one at mouse leave, or mouse. We're gonna add mouse out, I believe. Yeah, there it is. And this one will be the one that once we leave the date, we will see the string go back to being an empty string. So in this case, it's just mouse date, mouse leave, and then we don't pass anything in there. So now you can share event handlers within one element if you want. I don't think you have to do this too much. This is just an easy peasy way of just showing you that you can do it. There are better ways of doing it. I think doing the passing parameter way is probably better. But in this case, it's just for the example. So we're going to see if this works. What do we have? Ooh, boom. There it is. If I leave, it goes back to nothing. If I go back, what if I switch it? Switch it again. So this, as you can see, changes, it captures the mouse coordinates because that's what the mouse event args class does. And it also displays my date because that's what I told it to do. And that is basically it for event handling. You could go through the entire list on Microsoft if you want. I'm going to just bring this here. These are just the ones that I feel are the most important. You're probably, if you're a web app developer, you're going to be sticking to the on input, possibly the on focus, and the on click. And if you want to make something more complex, then you have a bunch of other options you can use, including the mouse over ones that if you wanted to track, I don't know, a sprite on screen, you make a game out of that. Maybe you want to do something crazy, do something special for your portfolio. You can try different things. But these are just the ones that I feel are the best. And this is the easiest implementation of this process. So we have yet to go into more complex aspects of Blazor, but as you can see, it's pretty flexible. And I'm very impressed with how it handles tables. You can make a makeshift table be very dynamic for you. You can make it more editable, accessible in the UI for whoever without importing a third-party program, which is very nice. And that's the end of these event handlers. Event handlers are pretty simple. It just took a bit of time to get this up and running, only because there is a lot more code in here than the last time. So just to go over one more time, you can have multiple events in one HTML block. You can have this bind value event is also an event handler situation. And the normal way you would do this is by passing in whatever the event is. Now, these letters don't matter. It's just because I like being consistent. You don't have to use an M. You can call it whatever you want. And then pass in the delegate, aka the function. And you can pass in variables within it. So it's very flexible and very easy to use. And that's really it. Welcome everybody to the Blazor example. This is going to be your end result. Fairly simple. However, the background code will actually be very flexible for you. So you will learn everything you need to know in order to understand routing in Blazor and how to leverage it to your advantage. In this case, we will have something like this. So if we submit this string as code, we will have two values coming in, 0 and the test. And we'll have many different scenarios of passing in the values in different URLs, in the links and whatnot, and show you the actual flexibility Blazor has when it comes to routing and how it's far better than Razor. So check it out. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to see you once more on my Blazor Basics tutorial. And today we're going to be discussing routing. I use the word paging interchangeably with routing, so if you ever hear that going on, just know that I mean the same thing. Anyways, routing is how we navigate between pages on an application or website or blah blah blah. Angular, React, Blazor, you know the gist, works in very similar fashions, and the only thing you really need to understand is how to implement these things in the Blazor language. And that's what we're going to do now. That's what you're going to be learning, and that is the tutorial for today. So there's really nothing much more for me to explain to you other than the fact that it's just how you move between page to page. So there's no fun bits coming out here and there, and we're just going to get started right now. Welcome back to the project, ladies and gentlemen. If you have been following me since the other two tutorials, then I thank you. You've been supporting me, and I love you. And if you have not, don't worry. This project does not need anything from the other two chapters that you missed. This is going to be brand new stuff on brand new pages. So you are up to speed, basically. Only go back to the other chapters if you have something to refresh on. And if you do not have an intro project, please go to my video and find out how to make one. If not, just understand it's just the Microsoft intro project. There's nothing really complicated going on, and there's not really any setup for you. Anyways, on this particular project, we're going to learn how to do routing. And the first thing we're going to do is add new tabs to our application here. So what you got to do is go to the nav menu.razor, and we're going to copy paste this fetch data list HTML with the nav link component twice. So what this is going to do is it's going to add two more tabs to the application. So the first tab, we're going to call it route example. And then we're going to change the href to the same name except altogether in lowercase. And the last one, we're going to call it test. And we're going to call it test as well, all lowercase. So if you were to run this right now, these will have no pages associated with it. We have not created it just yet, but we're going to do it now. So we're going to go to the pages and add a Razor component here. You don't need to add the other Razor page. The Razor component will do just fine. It's just you're going to need to do one extra step here in order to make this work like pages. So we're going to call it route example, and make sure that these are capital case, because if not, it's not going to work. That's the Blazor convention. So add it. So we have a route example here, just the header of name. And then we're going to add one for the test as well, test component. So now we have our test, we have our route example. So now we have our components. However, if you try to run them, I'm going to run this now and skip to when I load. I try to go to the route example or the test and say there's nothing here. This is done by Blazor by default, that if it can't reach a page, it'll just give you this message. But that is because we have not added the route attributes for this to be a proper page. In order to do that, you have to go up to the top of the page and at page quotation slash and then the name of the URL you're going to use. You can't use one that's already being used. This is being used by the index page, so you can't use that one, so you have to give it a name. So we'll call it route example. Now, I peeked into the future and I saw that this is spelled incorrectly in nav menu. So if you would you please go to navmenu.razor and change it to route example. This will help my OCD, please. So if we run it like this will all work just fine. And we're gonna just take the time to do it for test as well. So if you have this and you run it, again, I'm gonna skip it. You will see that the elements that are there, the H3 elements, are showing up because now we're actually hitting the route. So I don't know if you can see this, but it says route example here. It says test here. That means that our routing works. That is the super basic definition of paging. And if that's all you want to know, routing, and that's all you want to know, then you're good to go. However, this is not enough to run a proper project or web application of any sort, because normally you're gonna need to pass in parameters. And in my honest opinion, the three parameters that you're usually passing are IDs, bools, and strings. So we're gonna have an example of that, and we're gonna have a few examples of how to pass in both in code and directly on the HTML. So now things get a little bit complicated. You're just gonna have to trust me in a few things. So now we're gonna go on our /test. So what this project is going to look like is that we're going to have just a bunch of buttons on this test folder that every time we click on them, we will submit to the route example file. And then when that happens, the route example file will show you the values that you're passing through, showing you that what you've written actually works. So that is all the example is. So before we start adding stuff to the test page is always going to be just a bunch of buttons that are going to pass in values to route example page. We're going to have to discuss paging a little bit more. So let's go look at this. So up here, how Blazor works is that you can have unique and multiple URLs that can hit this page. So if I wanted to, I could call it app page. Instead of calling it route example, I could call it paging or /paging. I know I spelled it wrong, but it doesn't matter. It just has to be unique, and this will be allowed in Blazor. You can have multiple of these and it's all good, but we're not gonna add it. What we're gonna add is parameters to it. Now, how do you add parameters in Blazor? You have to make sure that the URL actually supports those parameters. So Blazor has a list of different variable types it can pass through, but we're just going to focus on 3 in this tutorial, and that is the integer, the bool, and the string. These are usually the ones that are the most prevalent and the most used. So I'm just going to set up an easy example. You could even do this route example, except we're going to add a parameter to it. Get your curlies on, my optional bool, and give it a type. So you have to add a colon, you have to add the type at the end of it to make it work. It doesn't work for all types. It works, there's a list of what it works for. And we're just gonna keep adding them onto this page. So when we go on the test page, we don't have to worry about whether it's gonna hit it or not, because we know we're supporting it. So you could do it like this, or you can just copy this again. Down here, we can add 2 variables. So instead of just my optional bool, we could add an integer. We'll just call it ID of int. And then we could add one more, which is going to represent the string. Down a little bit. Instead of my optional parameter, how you write a string in Blazor. You don't need to actually have the type. So we're just going to call it my optional value. And add, oh, I forgot to mention that if they're truly optional, aka that that you don't have to add them to the URL, you have to add the question mark to them. So this, in this case, this is not an optional value, but since I'm going to be using the same variable, I'm going to be one that's it's looking for. It's going to be necessary to invoke this page if you're passing a boolean in this way. If you're not, then you will only need to pass an ID of integer in order to hit this page. And if you have a boolean or a string come after it, you can still hit the page all the same. If you didn't have these prepared, it would not allow you to do it. So if I did not have this and I pass in a value of integer and string, and this did not exist, then it wouldn't be able to hit this page. But because it does, it can't hit the page. This is good for our example. If that sounds confusing to you, don't worry about it. You're gonna see when we go into the test razor how this all works. So as you can see here, I'm going to show you what happens when you have two of the exact same URLs on the page. This will actually cause it to break. Just going to load it real quick. Boom. So you see that the page breaks because you have two of the exact same routes here, and it's not going to support that. So I'm just going to switch this back to what I wanted to do, my optional value. And now we're going to try to run it now. Now, you think it's going to work. Well, it runs the page, but let's try to actually, I mean, it runs the application, doesn't break on it. But let's actually try to get to the route example. Ooh, what happened here? I don't know if you can see this. As you can see down here, we have an unhandled exception. So what is happening here is that these parameters are not being represented on the page anywhere. So it's trying to look for values that don't exist, causing a runtime error. That's why it was able to load the page, but it wasn't able to actually run the page after the fact, after we had all this. But that's okay. All we have to do is start adding these parameters in code. So we have 3 parameters here, my optional bool, int, and the optional value. So I'm just gonna add stroke, public int ID get that. So make sure you spell them the same way you had them. And not only that, but we're gonna add a Blazor property here called parameter. So this is part of the component stuff, which I'll get into on the component video. But for now, just understand that you need to add these in order to reflect these parameters. That's how you work with the components. So we have 2 more to add. And instead of an int, we're gonna add a bool. And the bool is gonna be called whatever it is that you call it. I called it my optional bool. It's a bit of a misnomer, but that's fine. You know what it is. And then the last one is gonna be my optional value, except it's a string. That replace the bool with the string. So now we should be able to hit the page without breaking it. Boom. So now the pages work as expected, and we have the new URL values here that we could work with on this test razor page. So before we continue doing that, you know, it's really difficult to tell whether or not you're like, it's kind of annoying to tell whether you're actually running the right URLs, that you're not hitting one and not the other. So let's make it really easy for ourselves. And before we move on, we're gonna add we're gonna actually just add what the parameters are being passed through. So if you see the parameter on the page, you'll see that this was a parameter that was being passed through from the other component. So we're gonna pass in the ID, and we're just gonna have the ID being reflected on the HTML. And we're gonna do the same thing for the other 3. Value. Oh, this is my optional bool, my bad. And the other one, my optional value one. So now we will clearly see what components get passed once we start doing the stuff on the test page. So right now we are done with the route example, and we're gonna hit the test page now in order to set up, all the buttons that we need to set up. So before we move on, I would like you to add the question marks to each of these values. Oops. We're gonna make them nullable because I want to see the value clearly on the page. So this will help us just look at the value to make sure that we're passing in what we are expecting to pass. And now for the test code. So all this is going to be are 3 buttons with inputs to pass in parameters in the URL to the route example page. And depending on, whether it's a string, an int, or whatever, we're going to be doing different URL calls. Now, I'm going to show you 2 different ways. One is just on the actual HTML itself through an href, aka the little links. And then one, we're going to do it through the code, which is going to be the probably the most common way you're going to be doing this if you build a Blazor specific project. So let's start with just an easy peasy one now that we have set up all our examples up here. Now, just in case, you only need this one to pass through in order to reach this page when it comes to the integer, because these are optional parameters. You do not need to pass these in, but you could, and it will still reach the page. That's the whole point. So let's begin adding our div here first. This div will house basically the button and the link for the first URL. But we're gonna go add there, add a class, call this form control. Gonna make things look a little bit nicer. Not gonna be the nicest thing ever, but that. And for this ID, we're gonna put an input type. This type of number, obviously. And we have to add those 3 types to this code like we did over here. So in fact, we're just gonna go over here. I guess we don't. Copy these. Here. And we're just gonna remove these parameters here. We don't need them for this case. And these don't need to be nullable. Now we have our ID and the 3 different values we're going to be binding to the inputs. So in this case, we're just going to work with the how we do input, how we do this binding here. We bind the value to and now we're gonna want to change the value when we actually type in stuff. So we're gonna do bind value event is equal to on input. If you don't know what's happening here, this is just 2-way binding, and if you need a refresher on that, I have a video right there, and you can check that out just after this tutorial. Now we have an input that goes with this ID, but now we need to submit it somehow. We could change the value all we want, but we haven't been able to submit it just yet. So in order to do that, we're going to create an href link to show you the first way of how you can pass in values. This is a very simple link. I pass in href in here. Now you could use the component nav link if you want, but we're just going to do it the way without the component for now. You don't really need it. The route example, and we're going to pass in ID. And we're just going to call this submit. Now let's run it and see if we have any issues. Perfect. So as you can see, these are our values here. And if we go to test, we have a test of ID 0 and a submit of submit ID of whatever we're gonna pass in here. Pass in 2. So I submit that. It goes to the value, passes in number 22, and you see it on the page. Yeah, you could see it in the URL. This just makes it easier for me to present it to you guys watching this. That's why I told you to add all those paragraphs. So you have the first way of doing it, which is passing it directly into an href of some sort. But how do we do it with the string? This is another way of doing two-way binding of event handling, actually, because we're going to be using a function to do all this for us. In this case, we're going to be adding a button. So this is going to be a type of submit. And this will have an event, an on-click event, that we will create. Doesn't exist right now, but that's okay. We will preemptively here. And we're just going to call it route with ID. And then add the to it. So it's going to say that it's wrong because it doesn't exist. But we're going to be adding that now. Public void route with ID, pass it in ID. So now here is where the tricky bit comes in when it comes to Blazor. In order for you to actually navigate between pages, you need something called a navigation manager. So where does this manager exist? Manager right now does not exist on this page, and you need to inject it into the. In order to do that, first you need to create a navigation manager object. Do so by this inject, and now you can do the public navigation manager. Call it gets this. Spell this. Supposed to be capital I. Yep. So capital I inject public navigation manager here. This should give us the ability to get namespace for it, but if not, I'll tell you what to do. Go up to the top of the page, go at, and now we're gonna add the namespace, which is Microsoft.asp.NET Core dot extension, and you go with that. That should now have the navigation manager. So I cut that there to see because I was having an issue. But what you actually, once you have everything set up, the inject and the Microsoft ASP.NET Core extensions in on the page above, copy this down here. So this will kind of let IntelliSense know that you are, you know. Oh, this is because it's spelled differently. I put navigation manager with a lowercase m. This is capitalized M. I want to call it something a little bit different, but now you will see we have a bunch of these properties available to us. What we want is the navigate to property, and this is where we can start adding our URL. Now, you might be thinking right now that this is a lot of work in order to just navigate between pages. The issue comes when your application becomes really, really big, and that it's much easier to work with the code than it is to work with something like this href up here, because you're going to be constantly changing it on the HTML. Also, it's kind of bad practice to add a bunch of these values right on the page. Kind of want to be able to filter them somewhere in the server side, which this does. That's just best practices. So in this case, we're going to be adding our route example here. Spell it correctly. Slash. And then be adding another slash in the end plus ID. So we have our route with ID here as a button. Put it as code. Submit ID as an href. Let's run it, and hopefully everything I said works and there are no problems and no issues whatsoever. Right. Now we see that we have an ID field here. And now we see that we have our submit href and this. We know that the submit href works. What about that the code we just wrote? So let's try 33. Perfect. It does work. It's fairly simple. Once you have that navigation property ready to go, you can whatever you want with it and change it all you want within code, which makes it a lot more viable for you to use when your web application becomes more complex. And now that we have basically the base of it all, we can now continue to add other functions that will also reach the route example here. So we're gonna make two more functions that will mimic the that will have the URLs for this and this. Now that we have everything set up, it should be pretty easy. We're gonna just copy this, and instead of here, add a bool. We're gonna call it whatever we called it up here. I would just call it optional bool. Route with so the reason why I am doing it this way, so I want to show an example of this really good, a really decent example of this. So we're gonna do this in a very complicated way, just for me to drive this point home. Because we're setting up our text as 0 or above, we're going to set up our text as 0 or above. There's not going to be a null for it, so that's what we're going to use it as our separator. So what we're going to do is show you one of the reasons why we want to have probably stick to use navigation manager as opposed to the href. You could do things like this. So let's say if IRD is more than 0, then we will also add our optional bool. And if our ID is more than 0, or in this case it's gonna be or 0 or less, then we're just gonna send in Boolean value. That. So what's happening here is that if I have an ID that's more than 0, this is gonna be a default value, so it doesn't matter. I'm gonna come here, go find an ID of int, and then go get the optional URL. I'm gonna pass in these two values. So if I were to, if I have a value of above 0, we're gonna see this kick off, and we're gonna see both an ID and a bool. If my ID is 0 or less, we're just gonna see a boolean get passed through, and it will work because we have a specific URL just for them. So now let's add the corresponding buttons that will do all that for us. Copy the original form control. Paste that. So in this case, we're just gonna have a number. We're gonna do. That's how you get a boolean. So the ID, I have my optional value here. Thing on input that doesn't change. Also change. And we're gonna have to change, well, our new one with bool. Expect I gonna expect our. Hope not too far from the mic. Now we have this route with bool ready to go with this route example. Not ready to go. That. So now this will directly just hit the one URL here, the href, and this one, depending on the ID value, will hit the one href or the other. All right, so let us check her out. Project up. It's not gonna be formatted pretty, but that's okay. So what I was explaining is that only this will submit one value. So if I press this button, you'll see that no other value was submitted, and you only see that the false was submitted because the checkbox, that hasn't been checked, it's false automatically. And in this case, I'm gonna add a number of 22, and we're gonna submit this. Expect to see both the ID and the Boolean value. That means it's hitting the correct URL. Now what happens when my ID is just 0 and I actually have something? Well, this was from the first example. So as you can see, there is no other parameter being sent up here. It's just true. So you can see that I'm actually changing the URL in the background, depending on what I want, and the page is accepting it. So although this might not look, too crazy to you, this might be something important if you have more page navigations depending on parameters that you want to send through. If your web application is more complex, if it needs this, that, and the other thing, this is how you would control it in the best way possible. And now we will introduce our final example, which is the string. So the string is a bit special in Boolean, in Blazor, where you don't actually have to call a type. So that's really the only difference. There's no like string type for it. You look at the table of types that Blazor supports. So we're just gonna take the route with ID here and pass in the int ID string of whatever we have here, my optional value. Just there you go. And now we're gonna add my optional. Now we have a route with and we do the exact same thing. Take this string type is gonna be text, my optional value. Sorry about the naming convention. I kind of came up with them on the fly. My optional value, and in this case, because get a string value to be passed, you absolutely need an ID to get passed with it. Well, that's how we set it up. So in order to make that work, you need this here, route, expect to test there. Pass in 6 string, test string. Check out that button. 5, and boom. And now we have basically a full example of how to run routing in your Blazor project. So this might, when I first looked at it, I thought, I could just slap it onto another, video as an afterthought, but there's a lot that goes into paging and there's a lot that you can do with it, and it's very flexible. And the best thing you want to do to run, your route, whatever your routing is going to be, is through the actual code, because you have better control over it, and it's much safer because this will run on the server versus if you run it directly on the HTML like hrefs. And that's pretty much it. If you understood all of this, then you're pretty much ready to go to build your own web applications with many different pages, because you have essentially all the different ways you could use all the different tricks that Blazor has for paging, and you understand the fundamentals of paging. This is not the complete, it actually goes a lot deeper than this, but this is basically all you need to run a web application and, have it work out just fine. So I think that'll be it. So today we're going to be building something like this. This is a form in Blazor. This form has validation going off because I'm purposely trying to submit it without data. And this is what will happen. So you will learn exactly how to build something like this today, along with validation, in order to make sure that you have the data that you expect to come back in. So stay tuned. Welcome everybody to another episode of Blazor Basics. And this time we're going to be discussing how to create forms and how to validate them. Now, what is a form and what is validation? Well, if you ever put in data on a website, that is a form. And if you ever incorrectly put in that data and it yells at you, having little red text at the bottom saying you missed something, that is validation. And you always want this on your web applications or website, whatever. If you are gathering data from people, it is your first line of defense when you are trying to gather that data. So in this case, we're going to be learning how Blazor handles these forms. So Blazor handles forms by allowing you to use certain components that were built to create forms. Now, what is a component? A component is basically just an HTML element with some code behind it, but we're not going to get into that in this video. We're going to do that in another one coming up because I can go quite deep. However, in this one, you just have to know that Blazor has some pre-made components that allow you to use forms and handle all that validation and stuff in it. So you'll see this as we go into the project. Now, the most common type of component that we're going to be using is called the edit form. Now, this particular component is special. It can actually handle, forms and a bunch of components that work with the forms. And this is probably going to be the most common type of component you're going to be using when using forms. And along with this component, there are going to be subcomponents within it that handles the actual input, like your text inputs, your number inputs, if you have a list, a select input, all these things. And we're going to be tackling a few different types in this one form. So you have a basic idea of how to build one that is, that has all the different kinds of things you might expect in a form. So obviously this is a basic tutorial, so it's not going to be that complicated, but you will be exposed to a couple of new components out there that exist just for this. So we're going to be going to the project right now. Hey everybody, so I hope you open up your Blazor projects, and don't worry about all this. This is just one of the other tutorials that I have in my list. So this was the route tutorial, which you could watch up here. And now we're going to get started on this one. You do not need to do any of the other tutorials prior, only if you need a refresher. Once again, these are all modular courses. You may do them without doing the other ones. Let's continue. So this is just the old stuff that I have here. You don't need that. No test razor, no route razor, need none of this. But you will need this nav menu. Now, because we've learned already how to navigate and create pages, we're just going to be doing that for this one as well. So we will be creating its own tab in here, and we will have a page just for this tutorial. So just do what I do. We're just going to copy paste the last list element here, right on the bottom, and we're going to call this basic form. It's going to be a very easy peasy tutorial, but we will get into forms more or less, so you'll be able to make your own forms on an actual project somewhere. And we're just going to call this basic form. Now that you have that, you have your tab ready to go. Next thing we're going to do is add that form page here. So we're just going to add that. Blazor component. These are all components, but don't worry too much about the nitty gritty of that. Just make sure you call it basic form. Capital B, please. And I just use camel notation. So up here, we will add this to be searchable by the page. Basic. So we're going to do a quick test to make sure that I didn't screw up. And I'll be skipping this. Beautiful. As you can see, we have the paging set up just fine. And now we have the page here. This is an empty page. We do not need this anymore. And what we will do is start with the namespace you need to import. So just follow what I'm doing. You're going to need this. Might be doing things out of order, but we need access to this data page here because in order to create a form, you need a model. Now, intro and the scenes there. So intro project data, and in here we're going to be creating something called a model. The model is what your form is going to need in order for it to do its validation, in order for it to actually interpret the data that you expect it to have. So in this case, we're going to create a new item. It's going to be just a C# class, and we're just going to call it basic form model. Now, I know you might be tempted to call this just basic form, but do not do that. The reason why is because you might confuse this because the actual name of what we call this component is basic form as well. So as a rule of thumb, whenever you're creating a model for anything, not just this, always have this a model name attached to the end of it all. So because I want to demonstrate a few different types of the components needed to filter certain data, what I'm going to do is have a few different types of that data here. In other words, I'm going to have 6 different properties to demonstrate the form. But wait, let's not get started with that just yet. So we will have a string, and we will have this form to be, I don't know, like you're trying to put a job posting. Yeah. So we'll have a public job title, public job description. And if you don't know why it's doing that, it's because I've done this already before, so it remembers the properties I've been using. So don't worry, I'm not going to go too fast for you. I'll just go slow. So the next one is going to be a date time component. And we're going to call it, must be missing a package. Just go grab that. If you are missing a package, just click that little red button and you'll be fine. Date of posting. Get. So yeah. So the way that Blazor handles its forms is that each one has a component that's related to the type of property you're using. So that's why I have strings and I have datetime. And the next one's going to be a Boolean, which I will call currently employed. So this is basically just your HR app. And then the next one's going to be a decimal. Doesn't matter really what the number is, I believe. I think that you have to use the same component for all of them. But could be wrong, but that's okay. And Microsoft has a list of these components on its website, which I have in the description below in case you want to look at it, if I haven't already shown it earlier on in this video. Get tired of writing gets it all the time, just copy paste. So right now we have uh, 3 strings, a decimal, a bool, and a date time object. Now, there's a reason why I have so many strings because I want to demonstrate different things here. Now, in order for you to do validation, because we're going to do it all at the same time, you need something, you need one of these. Now, this is called an attribute. In case, specifically, we're going to add a required attribute. So what you do with this, first you have to import the package. And now we could add data annotations to each and every one of these properties. So when we go and create the form and it refers off this model, it will know that we require the user to submit data for these properties that we have the required attribute for. So every job needs a title, every job has a description. And I'm just going to add them for all of them. I'm going to format it in a way that I don't want to format it, but that's fine. So we'll just leave it like that, I guess. And not only that, but your validation can also be a lot more specific. So we could actually add something else down here and add a requirement. So when you're working with different properties, they have different ways of doing this. In this case, in order to add a requirement for the string, in this case, we want to work with the string length. You have to write this underneath the data attribute. Just write what I'm writing now, and I'll explain it as we go along. So all I'm doing is making sure that my job title has a limit of 15 characters. And if we ever reach past the limit, we're going to send a message called shorten this. So I'm going to leave these alone and add only to this decimal here. A way of this is how you would do numbers basically. So you would instead use a range instead of a string length up there, and you can you need to get the type that you're using. So in this case, we are using the decimal type of decimal, and this is basically a function. So you have to fill this in with your range. So your range has to be in string quotations. But that's basically, we're just saying here that for this decimal property of years of experience is 1 to 200, the number that we're willing to accept. And if it doesn't do that, it will send an error message basically. And this right here, this string is going to be used in a list. And I'm going to show you how to create the select list, which is the drop-down list, and use this in order for you to have it on the form and to validate it correctly off of the options in the list. But that will come now. So now that we have this model ready to go, we can finally use it in our form. Now we have to just build out the form. So now we could actually begin working on the form on the HTML. So there's going to be a combination of code and HTML here, and there might be a bit of stuff that we're going to go back and forth on, but that's only to explain this a lot better. So the very first thing is underneath here, I want to write the actual form component that we're going to use. This case is going to be called edit form, and this is a component that Blazor offers you in order for you to create a form with its components. So there's more to this that we're going to add, but we're just going to add the skeleton here, and then we'll go back to it later. So within this edit form class, we're going to be adding all the input types so that it works with this form. But before we do that, we have to make sure that the form has a model associated with it, aka what we did here, in order for it to be able to interpret the data we want to put in and to validate it. So how do we do that? Well, we did half the work already by having this data, access to this data folder that has our basic form model. All we have to do is initialize it within the code piece. So write basic form model, and if you don't see this, that means you have something wrong with the input. So it should be right away showing up. Call it test model, equal to new basic form model. Oops. And now we have the model to work with. And we could start adding, we can start adding to the form by first adding the model to it. And the way you do that, all forms need a model. So you need to add this, a model here, and at test model. So now this form will be able to interpret the properties of test model and apply it to whatever's inside of here. Now, how do we apply it? Well, before we get into applying the actual individual inputs, I'm going to get a new battery. So right now, the most important bit of creating this form is here, which is the actual test model. Now we need to start adding stuff into this form in order for you to actually see, to actually start inputting stuff into it. So we would do that is by putting in input components. So I'll show you how to do that now. So we're going to make this look nicer by having a div first. And then we're going to have a class of form group in here. So this way everything lines up nicely in the form. And now we will call upon an input text. This will be something that one of our properties will be assigned to, specifically the string property. It could be either one because it works the same way. So how do you bind this property? Well, you have the test model here and you have the properties here. So we know that we want the job title for the first one. You will bind it like we normally bind everything else with the bind value equals to at test model dot job title. So you bound it here, and then we'll also add a class of form control as well. This is a HTML, this is a CSS thing, so just add it there. And then we're gonna need an ID down here. Now, I would normally have this looking a little better, but because screen is kind of tight, just move this out of the way. We're not gonna really need to go back and forth anymore, so I'm just gonna move that all the way so we can have it all. I'll just move back here. And this will be ID of this particular. ID is equal to job title. Now we need that ID because we're going to add a label to it, which is going to be the thing that you see that it's called. Not only that, but this is where I believe you'll also see the validation messages when we get to it. And you can call it whatever you want here. You don't have to call it job title, obviously. So in this case, you have a basic input text, which is just the string text that is referring off of this form here. And in order for you to make sure that your forms go through the submit process, you need a button, the submit button. So we're just going to add that right now. Input type to submit. I'm going to add a bootstrap class to it. Some color. Button primary. And value equal to. So now our form has a input button in there and it has an input text. So now let's run what we have here so far. So because you have this form testing for all the properties, nothing's gonna happen. And because we have no validation messages ready to go, you're not gonna say anything. In fact, to you, it's gonna look like nothing's happening. But there is actually something happening in the background. So in order to see what's going on in the background, you will need to add these two components here. One is called the data annotations validator, and one is called the validation summary. Now what this does is takes whatever messages you have here, and those are the messages that are going to show up. And what this does is that it puts all the messages in a list wherever this component is on the form. So if it's over here, it's going to be on the top of it. So regardless where the messages are coming from, it'll have them all in a list. There's one more component that I'll get into later that allows you to have the messages in a line specific to wherever you want it on the form, but we don't need that right now. Now you're going to see what's actually happening in the background. It's saying that all those required properties that we have there, we have the required data annotation on, that they have to be here. They're not being provided, which is true. We don't have them on the form yet. So even if I were to put a job title, it'll only check off one of the requirements, but the other ones will not be checked out. So that means that we have to add the rest of these inputs in there for the rest of the items. So how do we do that? We're just going to copy paste this a few times. And then here, this one's going to be job description. I'm going to be going a little quicker now. For job, I'm just call it job DSC. The job title. Call the job. The next one out of here gonna be date of posting. So date of posting is a different type of variable. It's the date time type. So you have to actually change this to the specific input. So in this case, as you can see, there's a number of inputs here. I don't know if you actually see this, but what we're looking for is the input date. So it's the job description. We're going to be looking for our date of posting. Job date. Call this job date. So as you guess, each one of these types exists for basically every one of the variables that exists, except the more complex ones that you can create later on. But that is something for another time, and that's not in the scope of what we're doing now. This one's going to be the boolean. Call it current temp. And there's a boolean one. But the boolean one is checkbox and radio, but we want to use the checkbox for this one. Current void. I spelled it with one. The next one after this is decimal, I believe, which is the years of experience. So here we're going to call it years experience. Call this just XP. Call this X. And we're going to get the, well, you kind of get the point, right? Like, you know what I'm doing here. So we're just going to do each one of them. There's only one that's actually a bit special, but that we'll get to not right now. This can't be an input checkbox. This has to be an input number. And this last one is a string. So this last one, we're going to use it a bit differently. Just copy this as you would. This one is seniority level. So what we're saying is that, are you a mid-level? Are you a senior level? Are you an entry-level person in this case? So we're just going to put seniority for the label. Okay. Experience ability. But we're not going to use an input number. We're going to put an input select. I spelled it wrong, but that's fine. There it is. So in order to work with this specific one, we need to have a list inside of this input select components. So within this component, bear with me, we're just going to add for now this option. Call it selected value, but nothing for the value, and call it select. So what this is, it's going to add one option called select, but it won't have a value on it, which means that when you do select it and try to submit it, it's still not going to work. But we're going to get to how to make it work in a second. But now we're going to head into the actual code portion here. So we already have this basic form model in order for this form to know all the properties it needs. We have our validation here so that it would be triggered when it gets submitted. And you'll actually see it. But now we need to do something with this input select. So the way you do this is, because we're going to use a list of string here, in this case a list of string of like the 3 things I said, we'll have a list of string here. Call it experience list equal to list of. You're wondering why I make so many mistakes? Because this keyboard I'm using is not an English keyboard. So I'm still not, it still feels weird to me. Oh yeah, we're gonna add this, by the way. So in fact, let's add this piece now. We're gonna add it to the top piece. We're gonna use it for an example later, and I just don't want to forget it. So add it up here. Give it an h3 value. Call it form status, and then we're just gonna insert it here. We're not gonna use this just yet, but it will be there, up there for the moment. And we'll call it nothing. Now, normally I would explain this a little bit further into details, but since this isn't the right video for this, I will just tell you that when you work with a component like this, you need to work within its life cycle. So if you want to fill in data, you have to do something like this, like data before the component gets rendered. You have to have something on initialize. And in this case, we want to put data in this list. So in order to do that, you first have to just add whatever data here. So what do you do? What would you use this for is if you're getting data, let's say from the database, you would put that code here. In this case, I'm just doing it because this is the good practice way of doing it. You could just probably put it up here and it'll be fine. But this is just for later, and I'll get into this in a different video. So as I said, we're going to be adding 3 selections here, and they all have to be lists. I mean, they all have to be strings because it's a string list. Finally, and because of good practice, we'll be adding this here. So every time it gets initialized, this gets reset to nothing. So what do we expect with this? We should be able to get the list to be seen here, but we still haven't added that list into this input select. There are a few different ways to do it. You could do it manually, and you could have an option for each one of these different types, but that isn't the good way of doing it. The good way of doing it is by having a for each loop run through the list and add them to the select list. So you do not have to add them manually, and you don't have to worry about if you ever change the data later on. And the way you do that is by doing this. For each. So here we're just going to loop through that list that we made down there. And for each one, copy this option here. Delete the selected. Put an at xp, and then since that will also be the name, I'm going to add it here. So what we're doing is that we're adding the value of that name to the option, and also having the name itself be what you see in the selected list. So when this renders, it will insert all this into this list here, and then once that happens, it will go through the list and add them as options to this input select, along with this, which is hard coded by us, but that's fine. This is you need one of these options to have this in order for it to be counted as selected. So this is the really easy way of doing it, by just adding something like that in there. But if you ever needed to, let's say you had a requirement that doesn't allow you to do that, you can add it in here instead. Let's say on an if statement, like if it's the last one on the list, add it there, or if it's the first one, add it there. So, another thing you can do. And now we basically have our form put together. Let's run it. Big checkbox, but okay. You see how this looks like. Alrighty, let me. I'm gonna move this a little here. All right, that's fine. So move it up. So let's try to just submit it as is and see what happens. Everything that has no value in it, will get, you know, we'll tell you that you haven't done it correctly. This one is, not done correctly because the range we gave was 1 to 200. So once we change this to 1 to 200, it will work. And the select has no value associated with it. So this is counted as no value. So you are expecting a value, the form is, and it's telling you, no, you don't have it. So let's try this for tester. We test stuff. See, these are going away. So is this nice and dynamic. This is going to be false off the bat. And I want 201 years of experience. Oh, it doesn't let me. 1 to 200. Being a little ageist here, but here. I always put 50 years experience, but this is modern day and you need experience, before you get the job. So you need 50 years of experience for an entry level job these days. It's just how it works. Now we could save. Now we don't know whether or not it went through. There's no data to back it up. We can't look at a database. So how do we know when we have submitted the form? There's one more thing you should know how these forms work, and actually it is how to do the on submit, unvalidated, whatever. So there's our functions that are created for you that you can use in order to determine whether or not you submitted something so that you can add code to it later on, and we're going to do that now. So you just saw we tried to submit it, but we don't actually know whether or not that submission actually worked. But the edit form has 3 different functions that each will tell you whether or not it did work. And we're just going to go over the most common one here, which is called onSubmit. And we don't have a function ready to go yet, but we will call it form submitted and we'll build it now. Together. And down here, we're just going to build that very function. Protected override. Hold on. Protected void. Call it that. And we're just gonna do form status, which is the thing we had added a little bit earlier, and we'll just write submitted. So how this works is that regardless whether or not your form actually was successful in its submission, it will trigger the submitted whatever the submitted function is. However, there's a bit of peculiarity when you do it like this, and you're gonna see what I mean. So look at the form status. I try to save and it just says submitted. But notice that none of our error messages are coming out. And that is because we're missing something to do with this, because we haven't actually validated it yet. What's happening is that the unsubmit is taking its place, the validation piece. But that's okay. We can still have an onSubmit function. It's just we need to change this and ensure that we validate it manually. In order to do that, I'm just going to copy paste this here. You need to write edit context. I'm going to call it edit context. And what this does is it allows us to not only read off the read off whether or not it's validated, but it also allows us to validate this form. It's going to be called edit context dot validate. And that is what we need in order to validate the form. Because if we don't do that, you're gonna that what just happened there keep happening. You won't be able to validate it yourself. And we want to know whether or not it's validated this time now that we have this information with us. So we're just gonna write a quick little basically if statement here. So this, now that we run this, it will tell us whether or not it's been validated. whether it's been success or fail, and actually, you know, trigger the validation. So let's just do that. Boom, it's failed. So click everything here. It's success. Also, a quick side note, if you look at the job date here, this is set to like the first year of humanity. You could set that by default back in the model if you want, or in the uninitialized state, depending. So you might want to do it on initialized if you want to just get the date, or in the model. It doesn't really matter. But just a little side note. But yeah, but now we have validation happening once again. So you see, and we also know whether or not the form status has been submitted and whether or not it's failed or not. So that is one way of doing that. And now there's another way of doing it. This one's a bit more specific. I would just probably use this, but what you could do is something like this. On invalid submit is equal to at invalid submit. So we're going to create this also, and on valid submit equal to valid submit. Gonna make it easy for us. I'm gonna copy that. Now this time you do not need to add any parameters in there, and we're just gonna call form status to valid. So we change the name up a little bit. Next one's gonna be called just make sure that I wrote it correctly. Valid submit. It's supposed to be capital S. Fine, that's fine. And here, obviously gonna be called invalid. And a quick side note as well, you can't have all three of them at once. You have to choose either using the on submit or using these two. So I believe that this will validate it on its own, so you don't have to actually do the edit context thing. We'll find out now. Yeah, so right now it's invalid. It went through the on invalid submit, and it's valid now, so it changed it to valid. And I believe that is it for today. Yep, that is it. That's all forms. That is all you need to do to understand forms. Go back here real quick. The most important thing about the form is making sure that you have a model attached to it so that it could actually read the properties, and then having this validation summary and this data annotations validator. Oh, I did miss one thing though. This is the last validation component you can use. And in this case, we're using the other type of binding here for level of experience through the validation message. So what happens here is that you will get the message come out next to wherever you put this for whatever the error is. So I'm just gonna run it one more time, and you'll see that the message will pop out on top of it. So if you want to get those messages coming out right next to the actual boxes, that is how you do it. So as you can see here, here's the message. We still have the validation summary up here, so it's going to keep showing up here. But if you want your messages to look like this, then you have to add that validation message thing right next to it. And now that's already it. So this is the basic overview of how forms work. There is always more to learn, and there are things that you have to keep in mind, especially with complex objects. It doesn't work too well with forms. You have to do extra steps. But for the most part, if you're making a simple form, it's actually pretty easy to do. And despite how long this tutorial might be, it's just to make sure that you have all the tools you need so that you can have, you know, whatever kind of forms you want, and to make sure that when you do the submissions, you have your flexibility of whatever logic comes next. And that's it for this tutorial. In this tutorial, you will be building the troll tool. You gotta pay the troll tool to get that boy's soul. And this is how we're gonna learn components. You're gonna learn the basics of components, and by the end of this tutorial, you will understand how to make reusable components and how events work between components. We're not gonna go completely in depth into components, but you will have enough understanding of it in order for you to get started and to build your own components with remarkable functionality. So stay tuned. while I earn gold to pay the troll toll. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the most important tutorial. I cannot stress this enough. Components are the backbone of Blazor. Components are the backbone of basically any modern framework front-end language like React, Angular, Vue.js, and Blazor. If you do not understand how components work, you're gonna have a bad time learning Blazor. If you skipped all the tutorials up to this point, that's fine, but this is the one you cannot skip. I cannot stress that enough. Now, for those of you who are a bit impatient and want to get to the project directly, here's a timestamp for you on screen where you can go and get to the project right away. For all of you who are staying here for the explanation of what a component is, thank you. And also, I appreciate all of my subs. I have reached 100 subs. Thank you. That is fantastic. Let's get to the explanation. So what is a component? A component is basically HTML and code running together. So here's an example of what a component looks like in Blazor. You're going to get real familiar with this, you know, the more you program Blazor, so don't worry. I just have it up here for you. And components can be modified. You can have data pass through them. You can have events pass through them, and all sorts of stuff that you need in order to produce an application that is robust and all that good stuff. But the most important thing in the components are reusable. They can be used over and over again if you program it that way, and they're pretty flexible little things you're gonna use in your program a lot. So I can't stress the reusability portion of the component enough. It is basically the reason why you want to use components. It's also far better to use components most of the time than it is to use actual Razor pages when using Blazor. The reason for that is because you need to communicate between components, and components really communicate the best with other components. So that's why you're probably gonna see components like when we build a page, actually a component. .razor, that is a component, and then we're going to have components within it that will communicate with the page and vice versa. So that's going to be the focus of our project, building some reusable components that you can have and show on page. But this project is going to be a little special. I decided to make it a little spicy for you guys. So this is the project from the rest of the tutorial. You do not need to go back and do any of it. We're going to start fresh again. So you might see some stuff that you haven't seen before, but that's okay. We're not going to use any of that. So the first thing I want you to do is go to your www root folder. Yes, right here. And I want you to create a folder. Now you can call it whatever you want, but I'm gonna call it media. www root is where you put all your static files and stuff in an ASP.NET project in general. So this is where we're gonna put our pictures. Yes, we'll have some pictures in here. So pick whatever pictures you want. It makes no difference. I already picked out my pictures, and I'm just gonna put them in there right now. Let's just do that. Perfect. I'm just doing this to get that out of the way real quick. As you can see, our pictures are there. We're gonna be using them in the project. It's important for me that I use them. So we got our boy Soul, we got a goal, we got a troll. We're gonna build this troll tool, make you pay, you know what I mean? So now we're gonna go to the index.razor. No, we're not, just kidding. We're gonna go to the nav menu. Actually, yes, that is not a joke. So in this nav menu, we're gonna add another tab for this tutorial. You're only gonna need one. So in this case, we're just gonna call it troll tool. And we're gonna send the href be the same thing. Troll tool page. So obviously this page doesn't exist. If we ran it now, you would just see the tab and it'll go nowhere. So we're gonna be building that page here. Go here. Add a Razor component. Yes, as I said before, this is a component, but we treat it as a page. The only difference between a component and a page, also call it troll tool. The difference between a component and a page is that a component does not have the URL we're going to add to this page. I will, you know what I mean. Put add page, and now we need to add that, what we wrote for that tab. All the same. I just do this to make sure. So here, so now that nav, that tab here will hit this component, and we'll just assume that works. And if it doesn't work, you know, it's a pretty easy change. So what are we gonna do with Mr. Troll Toy? Normally I would keep them the same name, but this is where the action is going to happen. So where you saw in that example before, that is where we're going to put basically all of our components, but we're not done yet. We need to create another folder here for organization and call this the control components. Because we're going to add the one component here, but I want to just organize it. Organize this project a little bit better. And we're going to call this the button and image component basically. And you'll see what I mean. So what we've done right now is that we've created the page that is a component too. And we've created something that we're going to actually be using as a component. So you're going to be seeing this get placed into this page, and we'll be using that in order to create our troll tool. So the troll tool will have a button, as you saw. We'll have a button and an image, and there will be two pieces of logic between the two, but you'll be using the exact same component for both. Now, how do you do that? Well, that's what components are for. Components are meant to be reusable. But we will first begin with our component. Go here. So I'm gonna eliminate that. We don't need to add any we don't really need to add any page stuff here. Remember, you add the page URLs only when they're using them as a page. So we'll begin by adding a div. And this div will have an h3 on top of it as well, and another div. This is so that we can keep track of what exactly we're doing and who the component is. So it's, you know, we're just gonna have that up there for that purpose. But these divs that we're adding now, add a breakpoint here because we're gonna make another div. Is just to organize the image and the button to have the image on top of the button. So for the image, it's just an image object. And we will make the width of this image object 300. And the height 250. I just wanted to be more uniformed. You saw in the tutorial a little earlier when I was explaining this that they're kind of big. These images that I got are pretty big, so I just had to do it like this. Oh, not yet, not yet. For the next one, we're gonna add the button. Here it's an input. Input of type button. Class primary, blah blah blah. Button primary. And we're not gonna add code just yet. We're gonna add it down here before we add it here, obviously. So what do we need for this code? So we want two things basically. We want the image name, so we want to reference these images so they can show up here, and we want a title. So whatever title we give this component, we're gonna be passing in as well, and then whatever label we're gonna give this input here. So this will not have, so when it comes out, it's gonna be empty basically. So buttons will look like won't have any words in it, but we will name the buttons depending on which side we're using. If you're the troll tool side or if you're the mining side, that's how you make money to pay the troll tool after all. So in order to do that, we need to add a few variables to deal with it. So the first one's gonna be title. So this gets a little finicky when it comes to nulls, so I just like adding a default title in here. So also that would tell me whether or not I'm actually passing the values through correctly. Then we're gonna have an image name as well. This is what we'll be passing into here. Maybe the same thing basically. And then the last string is gonna be the button label. All of it default. So in this case, we're gonna need some functions to actually do the whole, grab the image thing from a title, because you can't just, call it that and bring it in. You have to actually put in the you have to put in the whatever the path is for the media folder in my case. So in order to do that, we're gonna make a function, public string show image, and then this is what you should write. You're gonna return a string, put the $, name of your file, slash the name of whatever you called your image name, and then you put .jpeg. In my case, these are all JPEGs. You would also be better served if you had the same formatted pictures, so keep that in mind. If not, this is not going to work, and you'll have to do a little extra code, or just make it easier on yourself and just get 3 JPEGs or 3 PNGs or whatever. Anyways, we're going to do the exact same thing for a button. And our title will not need a function. We're just going to pass the title directly into the object. In this case, we're massaging the data a little bit. Perfect. So now we have everything we need here, but we still need to add this title. We still have to add the functions where we need to add them to. Let's do that. Title. In order to assign the source, we have to put it into the source attribute, and we're just gonna stick this in there. At show image, and the same thing, the value of the input. This will be the name, basically. Call it button label. So now we are almost done with this component. Now, the way components work is that they have parameters that can be assigned to them once you create the component on screen. You're gonna see this now. But in order for those parameters to be shown to the component, or to shown to you when you use the component, you actually have to assign parameter properties here by adding this annotation. So we need all 3 of them, since we're expecting 3 different values for each of these from the parent component to pass into it. This is how we make it generic. So right now, all this is going to be an image and a button with a different title. Let's go back to the Troll Tool page and see what we can do with that. So, oh yes, I forgot. So you see this right here? I don't know if you could actually read it, but if I were to try to write this component here, I had to come back up. Yeah, it's gonna ask me to import the wherever the component exists right now, which is in the pages of the Troll Tool components. We don't have this component available to us, so you're gonna have to either import it like this, at using then you gotta write the name of the project, where it is, pages dot Troll Tool components, and then you can use it normally. If not, you're gonna have to have this with it, or you could assign this globally, since we want to keep using this component in other places in our code apart from here. We don't have to use this. Instead, go to your imports.razor here. This is where you have all your global components. What we're gonna do is take this, cut that out from there, and put it down here. So this is how we share components across the app, basically. So you will have access to this as if you were putting the import up here. So you will see that now. See? So now you don't have to write all that. And this is the first component we're writing. This is the only component we're going to do here, but we're going to make it do two different things. So in order to demonstrate something, I'm going to get rid of this title right here. Get rid of the parameter. I'll just show you what happens. So I can see what I could add here. I can see the button label and the image name, but I can't see the title. Here. So that's not gonna work. If I try to do the button label, you'll see how it's actually supposed to look like. Come on. So this is meant to be something else, which I'll get into later. But this is what you want when you're passing in parameters. It has to look like this in the IDE. So that's why, even though I was able to get title from here, this is what you want. It has to be bold and green. So once I put back title with the parameter, it will change. That's just me showing. So now I have access to the actual title parameter here. So for Troll Tool, we're gonna pretty this up a little bit, but for now we're just gonna add the one component and show you exactly what we've done so far. So we're just gonna call it test, button label, we'll call it label, and for the image, we're just gonna get one of mine. I'm just gonna use the troll, good old Danny. So in theory, if this works, I should see Danny with the button called label. Oh no, what have I done? And the problem is button label. Oh no, that's the problem. We all make mistakes. Let's load this puppy up. See that? See? Roll to boom. There it is. It's called test. Like we passed it in. We passed in the name of the image and converted that into the image because we threw it into the source. And our button label is called label. So obviously this doesn't do anything. But our troll tool is being built. We're almost there. We need to give the functionality to actually decide whether or not you have paid the troll tool and the ability to pay the troll tool by mining. So how do we do that? Well, now we're gonna add some. We're gonna be adding some things onto not here. This is not yet actually. We'll be doing some changes there too, but we're gonna be adding the bulk of our code here in the troll tool page. So I believe that we need to add a few different things here. So for the troll tool, you need a price to pay. So I'm not gonna set the price. We're gonna let you know, higher powers decide that. So we're gonna let the system.net thing handle it. It's gonna do the random. We're gonna give it a random number. Then we're gonna have a number to determine how much gold we have, and we're also gonna see whether or not we have enough to pay the troll tool, and whether or not the troll tool has been paid, so we can get that boy's soul, which is what we want in all this, right? Right. So how do we begin? First, we need to put in some variables in here. And the first variable is going to be the troll tool price. Now, we're going to set this price a little bit later on, but for now, we're just going to add all the variables we're going to need for this particular project. We're going to need the gold, so we're going to mine it. You saw the mine picture, hopefully, earlier. And we're going to need to understand whether or not the troll tool has been paid. And finally, I'm just going to put in a little message here, so that when you can't pay the troll tool, it will tell you can't pay the troll tool. So now let's discuss a little bit of the life cycles of components. So components have a lot of life cycles in them, but in this case, considering this is a basic Blazor course, we're going to go over probably the most used ones, which is uninitialized and its async counterpart. Its async counterpart, uninitialized async. So this is when you're trying to basically, you would use this if you're trying to get data from like a database. You're trying to wait for the database to give you the data. In this case, we have no such thing, so we're just going to use the normal one, and we're just gonna write some code. Make sure you write protected override on initialized. So I wrote this wrong. On initial, that's not how you. Well, I'm gonna copy paste it. There we go. So on initialize with a capital I right here. Remember that you could accidentally write another function called on initialize if you don't have the right spelling. This has happened to me a lot. But first, so what happens when we have on initialize? I forgot to explain the actual point. So on initialize happens before the render. So before this component gets loaded, you can do a bunch of stuff here, which is how you grab the data before and then place that into the component itself. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to get the troll tool price before all this gets rendered so that the number gets set to the troll tool price. You will see this now. I'm going to add more HTML stuff up here, but first we're just going to do some of this code thing here. So you're going to see me bounce back and forth. The first thing is we're going to do the random. We're going to make a random object in order to create a random number whenever this gets initialized, whenever the component gets rendered. So troll tool price is equal to rand.next. And then in order to make this easy to demonstrate afterwards, we're just going to set the price between 10 and 20. That's what this does. This sets the price between the minimum and the maximum. So we're just going to use 10 and 20. That'll be easy for us, considering we're just going to click our way to the top. Toll has been paid. Troll toll paid equals to false. Obviously, not paying the troll toll yet. And the message will be nothing so far. This will change as we go later and later. So what we want to do now is make this a little bit pretty. So this is going to be some HTML in order to do this. So just follow along. We're going to wrap this all in a div. This div is going to have a class in there. This class is going to be called container. So everything that we're doing is going to be within this container, basically. At least the main things that we're doing. So in this container, we're going to have another div. And that div will have a class equals row. You let me know if you guys want me to just copy paste this here and then you can pause the video and stop and copy it yourself, or you want me to go along with it and explain the process that I go through as I do this. So this is another div. I'm gonna be seeing quite a few divs. I use divs all the time. Class is equal to row. We want them to be side by side, at least these two. Okay, touch this. Div. Another div within the row. Class is equal to what it's called, the 6. Yeah, I could copy paste this because I'm looking at it as I do this. A little behind the scenes action. And I believe another div, but we're gonna copy this one. Reason why you want it to be call MD6 because 12 is the max number you could have a page, basically. So within this, we're gonna have 2 of these. So this top one's gonna be the troll tool one. Don't worry, we'll add all the price and stuff later. But for now, we're gonna add the one on the left is gonna be the left one. It's gonna be the troll tool. So this is gonna be called the troll tool, obviously. The button label is gonna be called pay the toll. Because when we click this button, we wanna see if we have enough gold. Pay the troll tool to get into that blah blah blah. You get it. And the image name is gonna be troll, so this remains the same. But the other one, I'm gonna actually change a little bit. Earn gold. It's gonna be our title for that one. The button label is gonna be called gold. I guess gold budget, you know. And then the image is also gonna be called. Oh no, I meant mine for gold. And now that we have this, we want to see the troll tool price, so we're gonna put this over here in a paragraph. We're just gonna call it troll tool price at that. So you will see what I mean. When I run this, we will see that the troll tool price is gonna be whatever, some number between 10 and 20 before this all gets set up, and then you know you will actually see the number. Along with seeing different changes on our components, we're gonna see both the troll tool and the mine gold portions of them. Ooh. Oh, I did what I said I was out to do. That is to give you the troll tool and mine gold. Now, I don't know why this came out like this, but I'm gonna fix it real quick. Be this container class thing. Row. Oh, that's why there are 2 rows here. Supposed to have 2 rows. Oh, still the same. Well, anyways, I'm not gonna spend too much time doing this. It's probably maybe up. Div. Well, either way, we do need to add another paragraph to it. Paragraph here. This is going to be the gold mine. We want to know how much gold we got. Obviously, you're going to start off with none. Or you start off with nothing. Boom, no gold for you. So yeah, there's a reason why you don't actually put them directly into the component, because I don't believe there's a guarantee that if you don't put it in on initialized, it will actually do what you want it to do. That's why you have these live functions for the component to use. So anyway, we need to write a few functions because we need to tie that button that we have in this component to something, right? We need to tie it to a function to actually increment the gold, and that's exactly what we're gonna do. Protected void increment. I'm not gonna bother changing the I don't know why that didn't work too well. If somebody out there who's a UI expert can explain to me what happened and why same thing that I did before worked and why this didn't work now, when it counts, you let me know. And then we're gonna build another function to actually pay the troll tool. Pay the troll tool. Passing anything. There's a reason for that, but I will get to it in a second. In order to do that, we want to measure the gold mine is less than the troll tool price. then all we're gonna do is set a message, set the message that we have here to need a photo. And we will have that message right under the troll. Oh wait, I think I might know. Might actually be this. Supposed to put that in there. And in here, we put our message. Same with this. Put that here, put that here. This is probably why. Hope so. But if you do have enough, you put the troll tool paid equals true. And then you set our message to thanks. He's a nice troll. We'll do business with you. And what happens when you pay the troll tool? Well, we need to get into that boy's soul. I'm not saying what you think I'm saying. I'm saying boy's soul. So we're going to add the boy's soul here as well. Now, I've added all of those functions in there, but they're not going to work right away. The reason for that is because the functions are out here in the parent. But all of the actual, button clicking and stuff is done within the component. Something that you're going to encounter a lot, where if you've made reusable components before, that you need to make them activate events, but they are not part of their own code. This is meant to be used across the whole application. Is meant to be generic. So we're just gonna do what we did before, essentially. But this time I'm gonna be lazy and hard code it and copy paste like that. So image width 300, 250, whatever the JPEG you want to put down here is. That is my JPEG, and we're gonna wrap all this in an if statement. And obviously the statement is going to be of the troll tool. I don't know if this does anything, but I have it written there, so let's check her out. It's always good to run this whenever you write a lot of code, so you make sure that you don't break it. So hey, there was. So it was the paragraph. So can I mine for gold? No, I cannot. Can I pay the toll? I can't do it either. And that's a price. So we know that that's working. That the initialize is actually setting up the values here. So what do we need to do in order to make all this work? Well, in order to make events and stuff work, you have to pass these events between the parent and the child and vice versa. How do you do this? Well, in order to do this, you have to go to this place here, to the component. The component needs to be able to listen and send events back to the parent. So I'm going to show you a way of doing that right now. So we're going to learn something new today. Now, this is something really important. So we're going to learn an event callback. It's going to look like this. We need to send events like parameters. So this is how you actually send events down to the back up and down to the components depending. And in this case, the event callback will contain an event. You can actually have other types in here. You can have booleans, ints, whatever you're passing through. But in this case, what we care about is the mouse event because we care about the click. So that's what we're gonna call it, on generic click. So whenever a button gets clicked here, you want to trigger something. That is essentially what we're gonna do here. But the code of triggering it is not gonna be within here itself. What will be in here is this generic click event, and we're gonna have something like this: public async ask generic click. So this is essentially going to be a function that we're going to tie to the event click that we're going to send back up to the parent, because what you really want to do is invoke these functions here. The did you pay the troll toll and the increment gold. Now we could of course put all the buttons here on this component and make it easy peasy for us, but that's not the point of this tutorial. The point is to make you understand the relationship between components and how they affect each other. In this case, we have a child component trying to activate a parent's functions. Now normally they can't do that unless you have something like the event callback here. So this is how you would actually write it. You put a wait, whatever the name of your callback's gonna be. Oh, I'll just write it by hand. Why not? On generic click dot invoke async, and I forgot to pass in with the type. So you got to pass in whatever type it is here. In this case, it is gonna be this event args, and then we pass those args up here. But we are not done just yet. This will not work because right now your clicks are not being, you're not triggering anything. You're not triggering this just yet. What you need to do in order to make something like this work is data bind the onClick input to that function we just created. Generic click args. So you see this? So what's happening here is that when this button gets clicked, it will trigger a generic click function. That generic click function will be tied to something in this button and image component. And this is how you can create the same component but have it do different things. So because this parent has the logic we want, we're gonna tie that logic to that generic function on click or on generic click. So you'll do the same thing as you did on generic click. You see we're passing it as a parameter. That's why we have it written down there. And this is the troll one, I believe, is did you pay the troll toll. So when this button gets clicked, the event gets called, and when the event gets called, it will call upon this function here. So think of it that way. Click, you go down to generic on click, and whatever I just assigned to it is what's gonna get done. So we're gonna do the exact same thing to the other one, except we're gonna do the increment gold one. So now the same component has two different functions, and it's calling two different functions from the parent itself. So this component does not have any real code in it except for, you know, getting the image and setting up some variables and stuff. But because we're able to pass in this event, we can call whatever we want back on the parent, allowing this component to remain generic enough to be used in other places and allowing it to be flexible enough to do what we wanted to do here, which is to pay the troll toll. So let's try paying the troll toll and see what happens with our 0 gold. Danny's not letting us. So we gotta start mining till we get 13. Okay, maybe he'll let us slide with 12. Nope. All right, 13. Yes, there he is. There's the boy's soul. We got it. Congratulations, everyone. Here he is. The boy's soul that I promised you. So that is all there is to components. Actually, I'm going to undo this. So components. Components are the backbones of Blazor, as I said. Components are necessary because they are flexible enough to pass it in and out code, especially event handling code and data between each other. And you need to do this in order to work with the framework. Sure, everything else that we've learned so far goes into using components, and there's a lot more to them. They have a life cycle that's far more than what I've shown you. I just believe the uninitialized and uninitialized async are the most important ones you should learn, because that's what you're mostly going to use them for. If you have a component, you'll probably want to put data in it. So you'll get data from a database and you need the async one to do that. I also taught you how to pass events between components. So let's go back real quick. To pass events between components using the event handlers. And this is basically a trick in how to make a button that's not part of the parent trigger an event in the parent by sending in the actual clicking to it. So this is how you can get away with having buttons that can trigger things in the parent or what have you. But there's far more to components than this. You could actually have nested components where you could have one component within another. I would assume this is technically a nested component as a parent and a child, but in that case we want basically a parent, a child, and a grandchild within the parent or within the child. So that's a nested component, but that requires understanding more things like rendering fragments and all that stuff. But that is not part of this basic tutorial. I believe this is enough to get you to work with components in a flexible enough way that you'll basically have the building blocks of what you need. If you want to make something even more complex, then obviously that's going to be something for a different time, for a different video, for a more advanced video. But for now, I believe this will allow you to, basically get away with understanding what components do and how they work. And I believe my explanation of the events is probably going to be the most simplest explanation of events you're going to find on the internet. I've tried, trust me, this was annoying. But, you should be good. Right? Do you like this tutorial? Do you like how I exploited Danny and Dennis? I didn't keep mining for gold? If you did, like and subscribe and comment. Tell me if you want more of these videos. Do you like projects like this? Like weird esoteric ones that bring me joy? Or do you want me to do really technical ones like we've done before? I'm kind of aloof here, so I probably will have a lot of personality when it comes to tech stuff, but welcome everybody to another Just Blazor tutorial. Today we are going to learn about JS interrupts. Now, a JS interrupt is how Blazor interacts with, you guessed it, JavaScript. Yes, I know, we all thought that if we learn Blazor, we won't have to deal with JavaScript ever again, but that is not the case. The good news is that Blazor has a way of interacting with JavaScript functions and libraries so that you do not have to write a lick of JavaScript. So if you're not that good with JavaScript or you just hate it, you don't have to worry. And you still get all the benefits of not losing out on the JavaScript libraries that exist in the world. Remember, JavaScript has a monopoly on front-end frameworks and all that good stuff. So you don't want to lose all that. And Blazor provides a way to give you access to it while at the same time not having to learn JavaScript. Isn't that great? Well, we're going to learn how to implement JS interrupts in our project, and then that'll be the end of this series. Fantastic. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. We are going to get started on our JS interrupt project. In case you're wondering, my last project was the one about components and building the troll tool. And if you're curious about that, please go to the link above and check it out. Only after this, though. So in this case, what we want to do is get into the nav menu. We're going to create a brand new tab for our page. So just, get whatever tab is up here. As always, you do not need to do any of my tutorials in order to, do this one. They're all modular in nature. So we're going to create a new tab by copying this one, the nav link to. We're going to rename it. We're going to call it JS Interop Basic. Same thing here. JS Interop Basic, all lowercase. Copy that because we're going to build the page now. The page. Add component. Make it easy peasy. JS Basic. So we now have a page, and we want the route to hit this page, right? So please put the page top, and you want to put the route here. String / JS interrupt basic, and you're good to go with that. So my idea for this project is to show you how to interact with JavaScript, so we don't really need anything too complicated. We're just going to be focusing on the alert. The alert is basically, if you've done JavaScript before or you ever used it before, the alert is just the thing that pops up on a browser because you've implemented the predefined function that basically any JavaScript library brings by default. So that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to trigger it right now through C#. So first, we're going to make a div and we're going to make the button. reason why I want you to do this is because we'll make a few buttons so I could demonstrate a few different ways of triggering the JavaScript. So in this case, button, give it a class, a button primary. This will be test 1. And right now, for now, that's all you're gonna need. We're gonna build this is gonna trigger a function. So we're gonna build that now. Well, that function is gonna be the alert box function. So I want a message to come out with it as well. And I'm just gonna write a string for it. Get set. You write whatever you want. All right, click. Boom. Now we're gonna do the function. Now here is where you're gonna see the JS interrupt happen. I'm writing a task function because you're gonna create an async in order to trigger it. It's an asynchronous call when you do something through JavaScript. So in order to do this, you need to inject something called the JS runtime. So in order to do that, go up here where it says the at page, under it at inject. It does that for you. IJS runtime. And this will allow you to basically use the functions that Blazor brings because it has a JavaScript file in it. So also you have to give this a name. So call it JS. See if you're good with that. So I'm going to show you something real quick before I continue here. If we go to the host here, you see this script file here that has the JS in there? That's where all our JS is in right now. So in case you're wondering how we're implementing, JavaScript within Blazor, or at least the predefined JavaScript functions, that's why. If you want anything fancier, you need one specific thing, you're going to have to import the libraries, which I'll show you now a little bit later. But for now, let's talk about this alert box. How do I trigger this alert box through JavaScript? Oh, you have your JS run. You have injected this interrupt. Wait, JS run.invoke async. If this brings back a bool. Alert has like an OK or something. And then we're gonna confirm it. I'm not gonna use the just. So let me explain what's happening here. If you look at the invoke async, there's gonna be 2 different parameters. One is the actual function of the JS that you're gonna trigger. And the other one is the parameter that you want to add into it. So there could be many parameters, or there could just be one. In this case, it's just one. So what we're going to do is just invoke the JS alert, the natural JS alert that you would normally see, even if you trigger it through jQuery or whatever. And I'll show you what I mean. Oh, and also we got to data bind the function to the button, or else it's not going to do nothing. Click. At shorthand of it. That should be fine. Oh, I see. Can't. I'll show you how to get around that later, but yeah, I can't do that. This is gonna be that problem you saw. There's gonna be a problem that's gonna come up later when I show you something else. So I'll show you a way around it. That troll. So we have our JS basic and we have our little button here. So this button is gonna trigger a JavaScript call, and we haven't wrote a single thing of JavaScript. Boom, clicked. Ain't that crazy? That's it. That's the JS interrupt right there. Doing that and this. But wait, there is more. You think I'm gonna leave you with just this? Technically, this is all you really need to know in order to run JavaScript, but I'm going to give you a real world example of how to import like a library that's freely available, put it in your project, and then invoke it through this. And then I'll show you a way to make that process easier so that you can use the functions of that library, um, you know, much better and more consistently. Oh, that I picked out this. I was Googling, good alert functions because I didn't want anything too complicated. And this is the first thing that popped up, alertify.js. So all this does is when you click it, you get a different alert, essentially. So boom, get that. But normally you would have to import the library. We're going to do now. And then you're going to have to implement JS like this to make it happen. But you don't have to do that with Blazor. So the first thing we're going to do is import it. Go to where it says getting started. And you're going to want these things. Where it says JavaScript and all the CS files and all the styles and whatever, the style sheets. You need all that. Copy that. Go to your project. And we're going to go to, not here, here. Underscore host.chhtml. I remember that before Blazor used to have this somewhere else, but now it's here where you're going to put all your scripts and CSS links. So in this case, the only thing you want here in the body is the script, which is up here. So I just copy paste everything, put it here. So you're going to take all of this except the script. Cut. Go up here to head. Down here. Put all that here. Now this uses Bootstrap, and we already have Bootstrap in our product, so you could get rid of the one that it brings. That because it's up here. Got it. That's it. This is how you would import the project CDN. You could try doing it manually by having, importing it through. You could download it and put it in your project, in your way, but this is much easier and it would accomplish the same thing. So once you're done with that, we're going to go back to our component here. And now we're going to create the alertify box. So before we do all that, let's make a new button just for that. Obviously, the function does not exist. We're going to build it. Copy this function here. And rename it to whatever I just called it, I think, box. So how would you invoke this? Well, if you go to the alertify.js, you'll see that the functions are alertify dot and then the name. That's what you're going to have to put here. Alertify dot and we're going to do the same thing, confirm. And you should get the same confirm message that I got from here. Let's run this pop. S1, that thing. S2, boom, there it is. That is the alertify.js. So congratulations, you just learned how to trigger, how to import and trigger JavaScript functions from other JavaScript libraries. But wait, there's more. This is kind of annoying to do every time, don't you think? Imagine if you have to write all this all the time, every time, whenever you want to invoke a confirm alert or whatever it is. So JavaScript has a way, not JavaScript, Blazor has a way of interacting with JavaScript globally if you feel like it, and making it much easier syntactically for you. And you do that by doing this. So the first thing we're going to do, go here, and I'm going to create a new folder. Not here. Create a new folder up here. project. We'll be at the same level as pages. And we're just going to call this JS classes. JS, I don't know, stuff. JS files. Yeah, perfect. Calling it JS files. Add in here a new item of class. This is going to be our JS extension. That's what this is. We're extending the JS runtime in order to implement our functions that we want to create. In this case, we're going to use the alertify. So first things first, I want you to create this public this class as a static. Second, we're gonna do an await. No, we're not. We're gonna do add a method here. Public static async can be a value task, and this is gonna be our alertify alert. So what we just did there, we're gonna implement it here. And in order to do this, you're gonna need the runtime again. And hopefully it will yell at me and give me this. Perfect. Field gets the call it one. And you're gonna pass in whatever parameters you want to pass in. So in this case, we just need one parameter, which is the message. Function. Perfect. So now what we want to do is add what we added here. Go to that alertify box, copy that, come back here, add it in there. Everything happy. And in this case, we're not expecting a return. So we're just gonna poke, wait async. I believe you could do the same thing over there, but yeah, it doesn't matter. It worked anyway. So what did I just accomplish? Well, by doing, I'm gonna copy the alertify box. Oh wait a minute. I did forget one. So what's gonna happen is if I try to a JS run, what my expectation would be is that when you look at the JS run, that you'll find that class in there. Here, run dot, and my class is not there. So in order for me to actually have access to this class, it needs to exist in the product either locally through importing it, or globally by adding it here. What we're gonna do, have global access to it. We're gonna go to the underscore import Blazor page, find the JS files. We're just gonna add it there. And now, whenever we have a JS runtime object, we should be able to see what we just built. Extension right there. Alertify alert. We're just gonna build a new function just for this to show there are no tricks. Alertify box. And instead of the invoke async doing all this, that JS run dot alertify alert, and then we're gonna pass in message. Time's gonna be the, we're gonna pass in our own messages. Call it JS, and we're just gonna build another box just for that. So copy paste this. Box test3. So here we go. Let's run this. See, did everything correctly. So if you don't see that JS runtime, that means that you either need to import it locally or through that the global import. Go through 1, 2, got clicked, 3. JSON extension test, perfect. And that's basically all you need to know about how to implement the JS interops. JS interops are pretty simple, and that's really it. But I'll teach you one more trick. So imagine if, for a moment, you had a reason to pass in a parameter into this box. You won't be able to use it, as I've shown you, this fashion. Try to do that. Let's say I try to add a string here. Message. Added the string up here. Not going to let you. In order to get around this, you need to do the other way of creating a function. Lambda syntax. That will let you. Now, this will work and put in my whatever I wrote here. So if you ever have a need to do something like this and pass in a parameter through the actual HTML, or if you're having done something here and you want to pass it through as a function, whatever it is, then you need to actually invoke it like this. Then it'll work fine. I'll just show you real quick. One clicked, S2 clicked with the right thing, S3 test, which is what we wrote through the parameter. And that's really it. That's the end of the JS interop. We are done. No more Blazor basics. I might do more tutorials later on, but I don't know. I haven't decided. Kidding. Yeah, I'm of course going to do more tutorials, more complex ones. These were very simple ones if you're trying to get into Blazor. And I believe this is a very important one to understand because you will continue using JS libraries despite whether or not you like them or not. They have a lot of stuff that adds to your project, and you're probably using them right now if you're trying to learn Blazor in whatever project you have for a client. So it's very bad to just lose JavaScript as a library, as sad as it may be to say. But doing this, you won't have to run any JS code. You don't have to learn any JavaScript on your end, and you don't have to write any JavaScript. All you gotta do is make sure you understand how to use the JS interop, and you can still write all your code in C#. That's basically all I gotta say, and that's the end. Thank you, everybody. I'm so happy that you guys were here for my tutorials, and I'll keep creating more content for you. If you have any thoughts and opinions, maybe tell me. If you want to see something specific, then I'll be hearing you. I'm about to go. I have nothing else to really say on this. Thank you again, everybody. Like, subscribe, comment.